The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was her, standing there at the foot of my hospital bed like a shadow with a clipboard. Not a card in her hand, not a flower, not even a "How are you?" Just her, Elaine, with a lawyer I didn't recognize, both of them in suits like this was a business meeting and not the ICU. "Walter," she said, her voice thin and stretched, "we need to go over some documents. It's urgent. Urgent." That word felt like a cold sponge to the face. I had just come out of what the nurses said was a cardiac episode. One more stent and a dose of morphine later, and I was floating halfway between dreams and death when I woke up to find the woman I had shared 41 years with, flanked by legal counsel. She didn't ask how the surgery went. She didn't ask if I was scared or in pain or hungry. She pulled up a chair like a bank manager and slid a stack of papers onto the table tray across my lap. The lawyer, slick hair, voice like warm slime, introduced himself as Mr. Dorian. He smiled like this was routine, like people brought legal documents to hospital beds all the time. "Walter, your wife and I were hoping to finalize some amendments to your living trust," he said. I couldn't speak yet. My throat felt dry and raw from the breathing tube. I just stared at Elaine. She looked tired, yes, but not broken, not shaken, just composed, like she had already made her peace. I reached for the papers. Shaky hands, blood pressure cuff still tight on my arm. I read 3 lines before I realized what this was. They were trying to cut me out. Quietly, coldly, line by line. The house, the second checking account, my shares in the restoration firm, even my name on the title to the lake property up in Maine. She waited until I was too weak to fight back, until I was flat on my back, held together with stitches and tape. That's when she made her move. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. I looked at the notary stamp on the last page, half signed already. Then I looked her dead in the eyes and rasped out the only word I could manage. "No." And her face, God help me, I'll never forget it. She looked like I'd spat in her drink at the country club, like I had broken some unspoken rule. "My name is Walter Dean Morgan. I'm 66 years old. I live in Missoula, Montana, and I've been married to Elaine since 1984. And today, 3 hours after nearly dying, I learned what kind of woman she really is. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. Let me know where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because someone out there might need to hear what comes next. And trust me, what comes next, it changes everything. The nurse came in about an hour later with a plastic cup of ice chips and a wary look in her eyes. "Your visitors left," she said, as if unsure whether that was good news or not. "Good. Let them go." What they didn't know was I'd memorized enough of the document to understand the game they were playing. And it wasn't new. That trust amendment was drafted months ago. You could tell from the notary date and the type of ink on the signature block, things only a man who spent 30 years in restoration work would notice. Elaine hadn't brought that lawyer to protect me. She brought him to end me, quietly, officially. And suddenly, I started seeing the past year in a new light. The push for me to retire early. The subtle suggestions that I was forgetting things. The way she'd asked me, just weeks ago, if I'd considered assigning her durable power of attorney just in case. It had all been breadcrumbs. But I had ignored the trail. Elaine wasn't cruel in the loud ways. She didn't scream or throw things. No, her style was quieter, colder. She wore patience like perfume. She waited. And she made you doubt yourself. We met in 1982 at a Denver street fair. She sold watercolor paintings on weekends. I fixed roofs and stripped old houses for salvage wood. She smiled at me over a lemonade stand and said, "You've got the hands of a man who doesn't sit still." I thought that meant she saw me, understood me. Maybe she did once. But somewhere between our 3rd anniversary and our 38th, something shifted. I don't know when it happened exactly. It wasn't one fight. It was the silence that came after them. The last few years I noticed her checking the mail more carefully, asking about bank balances she used to ignore, questioning the value of things I'd never heard her mention, my truck, the tools, the workshop I built behind the house. Now, I understood why. She'd already moved on emotionally. This legal stunt, this was her escape plan, and she thought she'd win because I was too sick, too old, too slow to fight back. But what she forgot, what they all forget, is that a man doesn't need speed to win. He needs clarity. And now I had it. I reached for my phone, hand still shaking, heart monitor beeping slow and steady. Scrolled through the names. Carla Whitman, Notary Public, family friend, loyal to the bone. She answered on the second ring. "Walter?" she said, surprised. "You okay?" "Carla," I rasped. "How soon can you get to St. Luke's?" She didn't ask why. She just said, "Give me an hour." And that's when I knew the next chapter of my life wasn't going to be written by Elaine. It was going to be signed, sealed, and witnessed by me. Carla arrived wearing a rain jacket and holding a battered leather briefcase like it was a sacred object. She didn't waste time with pity or small talk. That's why I called her. "You still remember how to swing the hammer, old man?" she said, grinning as she pulled up a chair. "Heard they tried to nail you to the wall." "They brought a lawyer to my deathbed," I muttered. "So I brought a notary." She opened her case and started pulling out forms. Revocation of power of attorney, new medical directive, trust amendment, fresh will, clean copies, witness signatures blank. "You sure you want to go this far?" she asked gently. "Some of this you can't undo." "I want it to be permanent," I said. Her smile disappeared. "Then sign here." My hand trembled as I held the pen, but my name came out firm. Walter Dean Morgan. The same name on the company checks, the title deeds, the antique furniture receipts, and the first property I bought with my bare hands in 1987. As I signed each document, I imagined Elaine reading the certified mail. I imagined her poised fingers crumpling, her lips thinning when she realized the house she'd tried to cut me out of now had a new clause she couldn't touch. One that locked her out forever. We finished within 40 minutes. Carla notarized every page. She kissed my cheek and left the hospital without another word, like a soldier, like family. Later that afternoon, a knock came on the door. A social worker, name badge. June Halpern stepped in. "Mr. Morgan, I just wanted to check on how you're doing emotionally," she said. "I understand there were some visitors earlier." "Elaine?" I asked. She nodded. She expressed concerns, mentioned some issues with memory, executive function, said she was looking into guardianship options. That's why I was alerted. And there it was, the cherry on top. Elaine hadn't just come with a lawyer. She had told the hospital I was mentally slipping, trying to lay the groundwork. I smiled gently. "June, do I sound confused to you?" She looked at me carefully. "No," she said. "No, you don't." "Good," I said, "because I need you to put that in your notes." After she left, I sat alone with the beeping machines and the muted TV playing home renovation reruns. Then I made one last call. "Evelyn," I said when she picked up, "it's Walter. I know it's been a while." She went quiet for a second. "Walter," she said slowly. "Why are you calling?" "Because the woman who once saved my life needs to hear the truth about the one who almost ended it." There was silence. Then she said, "Come see me. You know where I live." And just like that, another door opened. But this time, I was the one choosing which ones to close and which ones to walk through. They told me I should stay another night, monitor the heart, watch for complications. But I'd had enough of quiet beeping and soft-voiced strangers tiptoeing around me like I was already halfway gone. I signed the AMA form, against medical advice, and walked out of that hospital with a bandaged chest, a folder of discharge papers, and the sharp clarity of a man who's been handed a second chance by mistake. I didn't go home. Didn't call Elaine. I took a cab to the edge of town where the houses get smaller and the yards grow wild. Evelyn's place hadn't changed much. Yellow paint flaking at the corners. Wind chimes made of silver spoons. That porch swing we used to drink wine on 23 years ago still creaked with the same old rhythm. She opened the door before I knocked. Like she'd been watching. Like she always knew I'd come back. Her hair was grayer, her eyes were softer. But her voice, same damn voice that once made me forget who I was. "Sit," she said. "You look like someone just told you the world was flat." I sat on the porch swing, and for a minute we said nothing. When I finally spoke, it wasn't about Elaine, it wasn't about the hospital. "I never stopped wondering," I whispered. She nodded, her hand folding over mine like we were still in our 40s. "I know." Back then I had told her I couldn't leave Elaine, not because I didn't want to, but because of the kids, the church, the shame. She didn't beg. She just stepped back, gave me room to make the wrong decision, and now here I was, broken open, watching it all unravel. I told her everything about the lawyer, the documents, the betrayal, about Carla and the new will. I spoke until my throat was raw and the streetlights began flickering on. Evelyn didn't judge, didn't offer solutions. She just listened like she used to, the way no one else ever did. "You want to stay the night?" she asked when the air grew cold. "I don't want to be alone," I admitted. "You never were," she said. "You just convinced yourself you had to be." I lay down on her old couch with a borrowed quilt and a heart full of unsorted grief. I didn't dream. I didn't cry. I just existed. And for the first time since Elaine stood at my hospital bed with that smirking lawyer, I felt like a man again. Not a patient, not a signature, not an obstacle to be removed. Just a man. In the morning I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I woke up to the smell of percolating coffee and wood smoke. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, barefoot, hair tied back, the kind of scene that used to live in the corners of my regrets. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. "You still drink it black?" "Always." We sat in silence again like the night before, but this time it was easier. The silence wasn't heavy. It just was. By 8, I was on the road. Told her I had errands to run, but not the kind you talk about, the kind that live in manila folders and safety deposit boxes. The workshop was exactly how I left it. Dust in the corners, tools still aligned by size, the smell of oil, cedar, and old secrets. I hadn't been there since before the surgery. Elaine didn't like me tinkering with old junk, she said. Thought it was a waste of time, but I kept the lease anyway, paid it every month in cash, because some things, a man's space, his silence, his escape, should never depend on permission. In the back, behind the false wall I built myself, was the fireproof lockbox. Inside, my original will. A duplicate set of company documents for the restoration business. The deed to the lake cabin in Powell County. Elaine didn't even know it existed. I bought it in 1999 after a rough patch in our marriage when I thought we might not make it. Never told her. Paid it off in cash through a shell LLC. A little one-room place, no plumbing, no heat. Just wood, stone, and quiet. But most important, it was mine. Legally, privately, and untouchably mine. I slid the key off the hook. It was rusty, warm from years of light in the workshop. She had brought a lawyer to cut me out of the world I built. I was bringing a deed to remind her I never needed hers. I sat for a while on the workbench stool, letting the hum of the fluorescent lights settle my nerves. Then I opened a new folder and started drafting a letter, not to Elaine, but to our adult children, Alex and Rachel. They deserved to hear the truth from me, not from a bitter woman with a lawyer's script. And they needed to understand something now, while I was still lucid, still sharp. Their father wasn't the fool their mother had painted him to be. By sundown, I was packing the truck. A few tools, the deed, the letter, and a small framed photo of a fishing trip from 1987. Me, Alex, Rachel, and Elaine, before everything cracked. And as I turned the ignition, one thought rang louder than all the rest. Let her find out I'm gone when she gets the certified mail, because this time I'm the one closing the door. The tires hummed low over gravel and frost-bitten roadways as I left Missoula behind. Trees gave way to open fields, then mountains. That old feeling returned. Solitude, space, a kind of quiet that presses against your skin until your heartbeat slows down. I didn't play music, didn't take calls. I let the silence strip everything else away. I remembered a party, maybe 7, 8 years ago, where Elaine told a room full of people that she was the reason our family business ever succeeded. She smiled as she said it, sipping Chardonnay, laughing like it was just a harmless jab. But if I hadn't kept the house running, Walt would have built log cabins in the woods for free and called it charity. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That's what husbands are supposed to do in public. But I felt something that night I couldn't quite name. It wasn't rage, it was erasure. She didn't see me anymore, not really. The next morning I opened the first savings account that led to the cabin. The cabin emerged around a bend in the road like a secret returning to me. Pine needles blanketed the path. The old roof line still stood firm, despite winters and time. Inside, it smelled like dry cedar and dust. I lit the small wood stove, cracked open the window, and sat in the corner chair, the one I bought at a flea market the year Clinton was re-elected. I laid the documents across the table. Carla's ink still fresh, stamps firm. Revocation of all power of attorney. New will, excluding Elaine entirely. Emergency directive naming Rachel, not Elaine, as medical advocate. Notification of property title protections on the lake cabin and workshop. Everything signed. Everything notarized. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the old enamel pot, sat back and read every page again like a blueprint. Because I wasn't just escaping. I was building something. Rebuilding, maybe. The fire crackled behind me. Outside the wind picked up, but the cabin held. And so did I. Tomorrow, I'd send the certified packets. Monday morning, Elaine would open an envelope and realize her window had closed. But tonight, under a quilt and a sky full of stars, I let the sadness in. Not to drown me, but to remind me of what I'd survived. She tried to erase me with a signature, but she forgot. I still write my name in ink, and I still know how to build from scratch. The fog was still rising off the lake when I stepped out with the letters. Each envelope was thick, firm, and carried more weight than it looked. Not just paper, proof, protection, and a kind of quiet revenge that didn't require cruelty, only finality. I drove the 22 miles into the small town of Ovando, still had the same diner, same gas station, same post office with the crooked American flag and the cracked window nobody ever fixed. The woman behind the counter, Brenda, looked up and smiled. "Walter Morgan," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while." I nodded. "Been dealing with things." She looked at the envelopes, read the certified mail labels, and didn't ask questions. But before stamping the first one, she paused. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "you're doing it calm. That's the right kind of dangerous." I don't know why, but her words caught in my throat. I nodded, paid in cash, and walked out before she could see the water in my eyes. Back at the cabin, the fire had died down. I stirred the embers back to life, made coffee the old way, and sat at the tiny table with a yellow legal pad. I titled the top page, "For Rachel and Alex, from your father while still of sound mind." I didn't write it like a letter. I wrote it like a testimony, a man's voice stripped of apologies. I wrote about what marriage looks like when one person stops seeing the other, how being useful turns into being invisible, how betrayal doesn't always come in slamming doors or cheating hearts. Sometimes it walks in with a lawyer and a pen. I didn't blame them, but I didn't spare the truth either. Halfway through the 4th page, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Walter Morgan?" "Speaking." "This is Craig Donnelly, attorney for Mrs. Elaine Morgan. I believe there's been some confusion regarding recent documents. I'd like to schedule a time to clarify matters." I smiled. "No confusion here, Mr. Donnelly," I said calmly, "and I don't do surprises anymore. If she has something to say, she can send it in writing." I hung up before he could reply. And that was that. Let them scramble. Let them panic. I had already mailed the truth. Now all I had left to do was wait. And breathe. The letter came 3 days after I mailed mine. Yellow envelope. Rachel's handwriting. Postmarked from Spokane. I sat on the cabin steps to read it. The sun was low, the trees silent. "Dad, Mom said you were confused, that the heart episode made things blurry, that maybe you're remembering things the way you want to. She says you've been angry for years, and now you're trying to hurt her. I don't know what to believe, but you've always been the one who told the truth, even when it hurt, so I'm asking, what happened?" That was the line that pierced me. What happened? As if love just evaporates without anyone noticing. As if betrayal was just a weather pattern you forget to mention. I read the letter again, slower. She wasn't accusing. She was searching. And it broke something in me because I remembered her at 5 years old, hugging my legs after school. I remembered her laughter in the truck bed on the way to Glacier National Park. I remembered her asking me to walk her down the aisle. I opened a fresh legal pad. "Rachel, you asked what happened, so I'll tell you, not with anger, with precision." And I wrote, line by line, what Elaine had brought to the hospital, what was in those papers, how she'd laid the groundwork for guardianship. I attached photocopies, proof, stamped and dated. I didn't write it to convince her. I wrote it to document the truth. After sealing the envelope, I stayed up late sorting through an old shoebox of photos Evelyn had pulled from her attic. Me and Rachel, 1992, sledding down a hill. Alex in a Batman costume on Halloween. Elaine, smiling, yes, but already distant in ways I couldn't name at the time. Then I found it. A photo of me on the roof of the workshop, hammer in hand, sweat down my back. Elaine on the ground, arms crossed. Rachel behind her, holding a lemonade. What got me wasn't the scene, it was the look on Rachel's face. Pride. Admiration. I hadn't seen that look in years, and right there at that cabin table, with that photo in my hand and the fire gone cold behind me, I cried for the first time since the hospital. Not because of Elaine, but because I didn't know if Rachel would ever look at me like that again. Alex's letter arrived folded with military precision. No envelope, just his name, mine, and a thin crease down the middle, like he'd pressed it against his thigh before mailing it. I sat outside to read it. The wind had picked up, and the lake was a black mirror behind me. Dad, I read what you sent, and honestly, I don't buy it. I think you've been stewing on old bitterness for years, and now, when Mom tried to protect what's left, you decided to burn it all down. She told us how she stayed with you through everything. Your moods, your silence, the business crap, the nights you locked yourself in the workshop. This isn't justice, it's vengeance. You've changed. I don't know this version of you. Frankly, I don't want to. That last line stuck. I don't want to. I folded the letter slowly, didn't tear it, didn't throw it in the fire, because it wasn't surprising. Alex and I had always spoken in short bursts. Car rides, sports scores, the occasional beer when he'd visit and pretend he wasn't itching to leave. He was his mother's son, not because of biology, but because he learned early that surface calm is safer than emotional depth. He didn't want answers. He wanted the world to stay simple, and I had just made it complicated. I thought about writing back, about correcting every assumption, about showing him receipts, documents, logs, even Brenda's words at the post office. But then I realized I was still trying to win him. And at 66 years old, I didn't have it in me anymore. Some sons grow up into men. Others grow away from their fathers like driftwood on a slow current. And if I kept chasing that piece of wood, I'd drown. I walked to the lake, letter in hand, watched the water ripple under moonlight, and without ceremony, I let the letter slip from my fingers into the water. It didn't sink fast. It floated first, like it still wanted to be read one more time. Then it vanished, and I stood there for a long while, not mourning Alex, but mourning the man I kept pretending he might become. The days had taken on a rhythm. Wake at 6, chop kindling, make coffee, walk the lake path. It wasn't retirement, it was reclamation. For the first time in years, no one was talking over me. No passive-aggressive sighs. No quiet accusations about bills or time or whose turn it was to pick up dry cleaning. Just birds, water, the steady beat of a man rebuilding his internal scaffolding. But peace never lasts forever. The envelope arrived just after noon. Courier, not regular post. Elaine J. Morgan v. Walter D. Morgan. My fingers didn't shake as I opened it. Maybe because I already knew what was inside. Her accountant, someone I barely knew, had drafted the petition. Claim: Walter Dean Morgan, recently hospitalized, is showing signs of deteriorating mental health, paranoia, and impaired judgment. Petitioner requests a court-appointed guardian to manage Walter's financial and medical affairs. The hearing date was 3 weeks away. Local court. Standard process. I read it once, then twice, then a third time slower. The real trick wasn't the words, it was the tone. It made me sound like a man pacing his porch with a shotgun, screaming at shadows. And Elaine? Oh, she was concerned for my safety and heartbroken at my apparent unraveling. She was staging a rescue from me. I didn't call her. I didn't yell or scream or throw things. That's what people like Elaine expect. It gives them evidence. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Carla. She answered before the second ring. "They sent it," I said. She didn't even ask who. "I've got a name for you. Abigail Flynn, elder law specialist, former state investigator. She doesn't lose cases like this. You free tomorrow at 10 a.m.? "I'll be there." We hung up. I poured myself a drink, black coffee, no sugar, and stepped outside. Elaine thought I'd fall apart, that I'd come crawling, gasping, broken. But what she doesn't understand is this. A man who's already been discarded once doesn't fear being discarded again. He just sharpens his edges and waits. Abigail Flynn's office was inside a squat brick building behind a shuttered diner and a nail salon. No fancy reception, no downtown glass towers, just a door with a plaque. Flynn and Associates, Elder Advocacy and Family Law. Inside, everything smelled like legal pads and old wood. She wore a gray sweater, no jewelry, hair pulled tight, no small talk, no wasted minutes. "You're Walter Morgan," she said. "Carla told me you'd come with paperwork. Let's see it." I laid out the documents. Deed, revocation, Carla's notarizations, photos of the workshop, even the copy of Rachel's letter. She flipped through them silently, eyes sharp, mouth flat. "Your wife's playing a long game," she finally said, "but she made mistakes." "What kind?" "She filed this as a protective measure. Guardianship, not conservatorship. That tells me she doesn't have real evidence of incompetency, just concern, which can be dismantled with documentation and one clean psychological assessment." She tapped her pen twice, thinking. "You'll do that assessment voluntarily. I'll file a counter motion immediately. We'll freeze the petition before it reaches court. Then," she paused and looked at me. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Morgan?" "I want her to know she lost," I said quietly, "that she can't erase me." She nodded, but didn't smile. Just waited. Then she asked the question that's still ringing in my head. "Are you fighting to win, or are you fighting to be seen?" It took the air out of the room. I didn't answer. I just blinked slowly, then looked at the corner of her desk where a photo of two older men sat. Brothers, maybe. Or maybe a father and son who had come through some war together. She scheduled the psych assessment for the following Monday, said I'd pass with flying colors, that she'd already won tougher battles than this. "You're not her victim," she said as I left. "You're her blind spot." Back at the cabin, I sat at the table with a pen, a fresh sheet of paper, and no plan to write her. But I started anyway. "Elaine, there's no version of this where you come out clean, but you never cared about clean. You cared about control." I didn't write it for sympathy. I wrote it because I needed to stop carrying the weight of words I never got to say. And maybe, just maybe, because part of me still wanted to be seen, even if it was too late. The clinic was quiet. No waiting room chatter, no blaring TVs, just a potted plant, a clock ticking like a soft metronome, and the faint smell of printer paper. Dr. Lynn was younger than I expected, early 50s maybe, neat beard, eyes like someone who'd seen too much without saying much. He didn't start with memory tests. He started with questions that went deeper. "What does betrayal feel like to you?" I stared at him. "Sharp," I finally said. Not loud, just surgical. He nodded. "How do you react to being misunderstood?" I laughed once. "I build something, or I leave." We went on like that for an hour. I passed the formal portions easily. Dates, logic puzzles, recall. But it was the unspoken test I cared about. Did I seem like a man falling apart? Or did I seem like a man who had simply been cut out of his own story? As I walked out, Dr. Lin shook my hand and said, "Some people think control and clarity are the same thing. You don't strike me as confused." That afternoon, the phone rang. Rachel. "Dad," she said, voice tight. "I read everything, Carla's notes, Abigail's filing, your letter, all of it." Silence stretched between us. I didn't dare breathe. "I don't know what to say," she continued, "except I think I've been listening to one side of the story for a long time." I sat down, heart slow. "You don't have to choose," I said. "Not yet. Not ever, if it hurts too much." More silence. Then, "I'm not choosing. I'm remembering." And the line went dead. I stared at the phone until the screen went black. Then I opened the small wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, Elaine's only handwritten letter to me, 1996, after our second separation. She had written that she would try harder, that she saw me now, that she was ready to stop using silence as a weapon, a lie dressed in cursive. I fed it into the fire, one line at a time, watched the ink curl, blacken, and vanish. And I didn't feel grief. I felt clearance, like something had finally moved out of my chest, something that wasn't love anymore, just weight. Abigail called just after sunrise. "Elaine's lawyer folded," she said, voice calm but charged. "They withdrew the petition. No hearing, no explanation." I didn't ask why. People like Elaine only push when they're sure they'll win. When the odds shift, they call it gracefully stepping back. But it's not grace. It's retreat. "She'll reframe this," Abigail warned. "She'll tell friends you were overreacting, that she was just being cautious." "I know," I said. "Letter." I hung up, packed a small bag, and started the drive back to Missoula. Not to reclaim anything, not to throw words like darts, just to see. The town hadn't changed, still the same wind through the cottonwoods, same cracked sidewalks, same neighbor's dog barking at shadows. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just grown beyond it. Elaine's car wasn't there. I let myself in with the old key, the door still stuck at the bottom corner, a problem I had offered to fix for years. Inside, everything was staged for someone else's version of normal. Magazines aligned, throw pillows fluffed, a bowl of lemons in a wire basket. The silence was thick. I walked past the hallway photos, our wedding, the kids' graduations, a Christmas from 2003, and went straight to the workshop out back. It smelled like varnish and rust. My bench was still there, buried in dust. The pegboard still held the tools she once called junk. I ran my hand over the worn handle of my old chisel set. Then I saw it, tucked in the corner behind an empty coffee can, a wooden toy car, small, hand-carved, wheels still intact. I had made it for Alex when he was 4. He broke it an hour later. Elaine told me not to fix it. "Let him learn consequences," she'd said. But I had fixed it anyway, quietly. Glued the axle and sanded the edges smooth. Now it sat in the corner, abandoned. I picked it up, turned it in my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something sharp rise. Not rage, not sadness. just the ache of remembering who I had once been when no one was watching. A father, a maker, a man who fixed what others left broken. And as I stood there holding that tiny car, I realized not everything I built had been lost. Some things just needed to be found again. The drive back to the cabin felt different, less like retreat, more like return. I didn't check the mail that day, didn't turn on my phone. I split logs until my shoulders ached, then cleared the brush from around the porch, fixed a loose shutter, restrung the clothesline. It wasn't about chores, it was about reminding myself that these hands still built things, that I was still useful. Inside, I laid out all the documents on the kitchen table again, not to revise, but to organize. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was preparing for the rest of my life. Then I pulled out a fresh page and wrote, "To Rachel, not as a defense, but as a father." I told her I forgave her doubt, that I didn't expect loyalty, only clarity. I told her to trust her instincts, not the versions of people filtered through pain. And I ended with a story she'd long forgotten, the time she tried to build a treehouse with scrap wood and rope, and how I stood behind her the whole time, silent, making sure the knots held. Not doing it for her, just making sure she wouldn't fall. I sealed the envelope and put it aside. Then my phone buzzed. One new message. Evelyn. Back from Idaho. Porch swings lonely. You still cook? I stared at the screen, smiling without realizing it. It had been years since anyone wanted something from me that wasn't tied to money, memory, or obligation. I opened the cabinets, pulled out the old cast-iron skillet, defrosted 2 trout I'd caught and kept on ice. Set the table for 2. No wine, just tea. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, a meal without tension. The fire was already going by the time I saw her headlights through the trees, and I thought to myself, let Elaine play her games, let Alex stay angry, because tonight something real was walking up my porch steps, and I was finally ready to open a door again. Evelyn stepped out of the car with a paper bag and her same slow stride. Time had softened her, not worn her down, like river stone, not rust. "I brought bread," she said, holding it up. I held the door open. "I brought fish," she laughed, and it was the kind of sound that makes a house feel like a home. Dinner was quiet in the best way, no small talk, no forced smiles, just 2 people chewing, sharing, remembering how not to fill the air with filler. Afterwards we sat on the porch swing as the night pulled the sky down. "I read your story," she said softly. "My story. The one you didn't write for court. The one in your face." I looked away. "You won," she continued. "She retreated. The legal part's over." I nodded, not knowing where she was going. "But have you healed from the wound?" she asked. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because healing isn't always something you feel in real time. Sometimes it shows up in hindsight, in the way you no longer flinch when someone says their name. Inside, we washed dishes together. She dried. I rinsed. It was unremarkable and perfect. Before she left, she handed me a gift, small, wrapped in craft paper. "A journal," she said. "Figured you've got more left to say than you're letting on." She didn't ask to stay the night, didn't lean in for anything more. She just said, "Let it matter, even if no one reads it but you." I waited until her taillights disappeared into the trees. Then I sat at the table, opened the first page, and stared at the blankness. For the first time, I wasn't writing to justify. I wasn't writing to Rachel or Alex or even Elaine. I was writing to myself. I picked up the pen and wrote the first line. I am still here, and no one gets to erase that. The fire crackled low behind me, and I kept writing. The journal filled slowly, not in bursts, but like rain filling a dry creek. One page at a time. Some mornings I wrote about restoring furniture, others about the smell of Evelyn's hair when she used to lean on my shoulder in 1998. I wrote about silence, about the weight of being misunderstood, about the dull ache of staying in a marriage long after the music stopped playing. Evelyn came every weekend now. Sometimes she stayed in the guest room. Sometimes we just sat on the porch and didn't speak for hours. On the third Saturday of October, she was flipping through one of my old paperbacks, The Old Man and the Sea, when she paused. "What's this?" she asked. She held up a yellowed envelope, barely sealed. It was addressed in shaky teenage handwriting. To Dad. In case I don't say this enough. Alex. I hadn't seen it in decades. Inside was a short note, no more than a paragraph. I know I don't talk much. I know I roll my eyes and act like I don't care, but I watch you work. I watch how you fix things. I want to be like that, even if I don't know how to say it yet. 13 years old, a time when boys armor themselves in sarcasm. I read it 3 times, then I placed it gently on the journal's last filled page and stared at it until the fire in the stove was all but embers. That boy still lived inside my son somewhere, maybe buried, maybe hardened. But there. I wouldn't call him, wouldn't write another letter, but I would leave something behind. A map back home. The next morning, I started building a second journal. Not about Elaine, not about pain, but about me. The me Alex had once admired. The version of me he could still find if he ever chose to look. No expectations, just a key. In case the door ever opened again. The snow came hard and early. Thick flurries clung to the trees, blanketed the roof, muffled every sound outside the cabin walls. Inside, the fire cracked and hissed. I kept it alive like it was breath itself. The morning of December 12th, my birthday, Evelyn showed up in a red parka, cheeks flushed, holding a box and a crooked smile. "You really think I'd let you spend this one alone?" she said. I hadn't even remembered it was today. She baked a cake, dense, slightly burnt on one side, and wrapped a small gift in newspaper. Inside, a set of brand new chisels. "Every craftsman deserves sharp tools," she said. I hadn't touched the workbench in weeks, but that afternoon I pulled out the half-finished oak table I'd started restoring last spring. The one Elaine said was a waste of time. I had kept it in the shed, too proud to throw it out, too angry to finish it. Evelyn helped me sand the edges, her hands steady, her presence warm. "This table have a name?" she asked. "No," I said, "but maybe it will, once it knows what it is." We varnished in silence, side by side like old hands in a forgotten waltz. Later she lit the candles, sang quietly. I didn't wish for anything. I just watched the flames flicker and thought, I'm still here. After cake, she turned on the radio, one of those stations that still plays Sinatra and Dean Martin like the decades never changed. She held out her hand. "Dance?" My body protested, joints stiff, heart cautious. But I stood. I took her hand. And in that tiny living room, we swayed, her head against my shoulder, my chin in her hair. the fire whispering behind us. She whispered, "Do you think you'll ever let go of the story?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe not. But it doesn't hurt the same way anymore." She smiled. "That's something." And for the first time since Elaine stepped into my hospital room with a lawyer and a plan, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because the story wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. Still dancing, still building, still here. The snow melted slowly that year, as if winter didn't want to let go. But eventually the trees began to green again. Birds returned. The lake thawed in slow ripples. I spent most mornings finishing the oak table. It came out beautiful, imperfect but strong. Sanded smooth, stained deep, edges slightly uneven like a good memory. I placed it at the center of the cabin. Not against a wall, not tucked in a corner. Centered. One morning I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Just one line inside. "I'll visit this summer. Rachel." I read it twice. Didn't smile. Didn't cry. Just circled the month of July in pencil on the wall calendar. I didn't write her back. Because sometimes the promise of presence is enough. I cleaned the cabin, sharpened my tools, restocked the pantry, reorganized the bookshelf. Each act was small, quiet, but sacred. Not for performance, for peace. The last page of my journal sat blank for a week. Then, on a Tuesday in early April, I closed it without filling that page. Because for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to explain anything. The fire was low. The light poured in soft through the cabin windows. And I sat at the table I built, hands calloused, heart quieter, breath steady. Not waiting, not hiding, just alive. And finally, unmistakably, free.